Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this meeting of the Executive Scrutiny Board on Tuesday, no, it's not, it's Monday. That's tricky. Monday, okay. Right, that's thrown me for starters. Anyway, welcome and thank you for attending the meeting. Welcome to the public who have taken the time to listen to us. Can I ask members and officers just to identify themselves when they address the meeting initially, so that the public know who we are, who they're talking to and whatever, please. And I'll take apologies first, if that's okay. Thank you. We don't know about Councillor Ingle. Okay. Any late items? No late items? Declarations of interest in the agenda, please, members. Nothing? Good. So, the minutes held of the meeting on the 10th of July have been circulated or are on the papers. Any comments, queries? Thank you. And a seconder? Councillor Eyre, thank you. Just while we're on the subject of minutes, I just want to refer back to a previous meeting on the 13th of June when the Exec Scrutiny Board met, and we made recommendation that Cabinet look at three particular items. One was the number of people in effective alcohol treatment. The second one was around rough sleeping, and the third one was around average working day sickness levels. We recommended that Cabinet members looked at these particular items and came back with information or reports on the subject. Their decision on the 14th of June was to refer them back to the appropriate scrutiny boards and ask them if they might consider them as topic reviews or whatever. The feedback we've had so far is that 2 have been accepted as topic reviews, but the average working days per employee, it's suggested that it's dealt with at the personnel committee. And so, and I don't know if it's okay with you, but I'm prepared to accept an update from the personnel committee each time they look at that scenario to keep us updated. And if we're not confident or not happy that sufficient process has been and progress is being made, then we can have another look at it. Is that okay with you? Councillor, you're on that committee, can you bring that to their attention as well?
Yes, Chair, I'm a member of the Personnel Committee. I'm happy to make sure that's something they're aware of.
And the officers can add it to the agenda as well for them. Okay. Good. In that case then, forward plan. Any comments on the forward plan? Starting to get populated a little bit more. Yes.
Yes, Chair, I was pleased to see that there were a good number of new items coming in, which potentially could have been delayed for a while. Though I was disappointed that some of them are actually coming to our going to Cabinet this week, so it didn't actually give very much notice. But at least it's a trend that we can hopefully see more of.
I think we got the message through that we want to see as early a notice of items for the forward plan as possible. Yes.
Yes, Chair. I was wondering whether you could just give me a little bit of information. So obviously Project Assemble is in the forward plan. And I'm just, it notes in the forward plan about completing a feasibility phase. I'm just wondering how long has that feasibility phase been occurring for? Because I think it's been alluded to that they've been working on this for something like 6 years, which seems a little bit hysterically long for a feasibility phase.
Yeah, well, it's not always been called Project Assemble. It's had various iterations along the way and different plans and different ideas for it. Project Assemble's been muted for around a year, I think, but progress has not been what I would expect, and there's aspects of the work that needs to be done and has been requested on the Assembly Room site that's not been done, and hopefully that will be picked up in the course of the review and the paper that comes to both exec scrutiny and cabinet as soon as practicable. And I think the forward plan says the earliest opportunity is September. Well, I think we can encourage them to bring it then, because there are things like asbestos on the ceiling, the special ceiling in there, and the plans for demolition that need to be brought forward along the way. So you're right, it's been a long time in the making, but not always in that name.
Thank you very much for that, Chair. I think I think we were all aware that this has been rumbling on for too long now. The Council, the Cabinet and the Cabinet member who is responsible for this, I think, need to get a wiggle on and get this moving.
Great. Okay. Any other comments, thoughts on the forward plan? If you can encourage any other scrutiny boards or boards and meetings that you're involved with, if you can encourage officers to include stuff in the forward plan, I would appreciate your cooperation and support in that, because not just for our information, but the public need to know what the plans are for dealing with various items. Okay. So item 6 is the Council Cabinet responses to scrutiny recommendations. So at the last meeting there was an exempt item on the Sinn Féin plant. There's since been a public statement in relation to the outcome of that, which is still being debated and talked about and whatever. We made quite strong recommendations in that, the suggestion was that a redacted copy of the reports that were available at that time be made available alongside the public statement. Cabinet declined that. I still think that's important, and I think there are aspects of that that statement, joint statement, that need to be explored in various formats along the way, and some more detail that needs to come out on the subject. Councillor Home.
Thank you, Chair. Could you just recap on the reasoning behind Cabinet disagreeing with the release of a redacted report?
I think the gist of it, Councillor Holmes, was that it's a three-way thing, both the County Council, the City Council and the plaintiffs in the case, if you like, and that part of the negotiated deal was that there would be an agreed statement following the completion of the arrangement, and not the full detail being released.
Sorry. I mean, just to comment on that, I've been privy to that report, and whilst there's clearly commercial sensitivities and legal sensitivities within that document, for me, it's in the public interest. The public deserve, the taxpayers of the city deserve to know some of the detail to be explained to them as to why the cost has been incurred, etc. I think we should still push for detail to be released. Like I say, I think it's in the public interest, and I believe, having seen that particular report, that it's a fairly straightforward job of redacting the very sensitive information and releasing the rest. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I think the agreed statement that's been put out is very basic. It just has one basic figure in, which is not explanatory of the additional costs that there are around it, legal costs and VAT and everything else that goes into the deal. But I'm sure, because it is now, there is no particular sensitivity around it, then there's no reason why that detail shouldn't be come out. And I think the parties will be making representations for it to be made more available to the public. Yes, Lucy.
It was interesting, Chair, because I asked something similar to this after the media had been reporting on this, and I've been sent the link to the statement that was sent out on the County Council's website and not our own, and I think it ought to be on ours as well, as the very minimum.
I wasn't aware that it hadn't been included on our side.
I can't say it isn't included, but one of the city officers sent me the link to the county website.
Can we confirm that or check up on that, please? That it is available on the Derby City website, in the same information as is available in the county. Yeah. Yes.
I can come in on that, Chris. Part of the communication strategy agreed on the project is that statements would be published on the County Council's website and not necessarily the city's. So all archive statements sit on the County Council's website.
I suspect we need to make sure it's put on the Derby City Council website, and we don't try and absolve ourselves of any of responsibility. And that, can we make that a recommendation of exec scrutiny? People are okay with that?
Chair, could you please indicate who the speaker was who gave us the information about representation on the
Cara's
website?
the head of Derby City Council's communications department. We forgot to announce herself when we spoke up. Okay, so we can bring that as a recommendation, yeah? And actually, repeat the suggestion that it's dealt with also by way of a redacted form. So let's turn our attention to the current Council Cabinet agenda, which is for, are they doing it tomorrow? I believe, aren't they? Did he brought it forward from the Wednesday to the Tuesday? I was informed. I thought they were going to bring it forward to the Tuesday, but anyway, it's either tomorrow or Wednesday, whichever the case is. And so we normally look at the full cabinet agenda. So the normal ones are 1 to 6, up to where the minutes of the previous meeting on the 12th of July are considered. Item 7 is dealing with any recommendations from this scrutiny board, which they continued the policy of dealing with by way of any recommendation on a particular item. So we can't do that until we've decided if we've got any more recommendations, which takes us to item 8, which is the South Derby Growth Zone, which is quite a lot of paperwork. But it follows on from a decision made by Cabinet in February in relation to this. I presume, Bernard, are you going to
Yes,
lead on this?
yes, Chair, thank you. Verna Bayliss, Director of Sustainability, and forgive me because I'm a substitute for the report's authors who are on leave at the moment. But just to give you a very brief summary, this is a procedural report to highlight the land within the Derby boundary that Derbyshire need to acquire as part of the land assembly for this project. It will deliver the new A50 junction and links to the existing road network within Infinity Park Derby, and also their authority to alter the highway as required as part of the construction of the scheme. So 4.2 in the Derby report shows the extent of the site. You've got a little map there. And these are the enabling infrastructure works for the significant housing and commercial development on this site. So Derbyshire County Council are leading the project, and there is a multi-authority governance in place. The project is fully funded based on current cost estimates, and planning permission is in place, which included an extensive consultation for these enabling works. So the authorisation, as the Chair has referenced, has already been delegated to Derbyshire County Council by Cabinet to do this, and the appended minutes in this report set that out. Progress is being made, steady progress being made. Derbyshire have entered into a construction contract with Galliford Try for these highway works. A detailed design through the design and build contract is being undertaken and will inform the final full business case. Should CPO be needed, then the start date on site is likely to be early in 2025. If not, it could be as early as next year. But every effort will be made to reach agreement rather than move to anything that is compulsory CPO. Very much the preferred route remains on that voluntary basis in negotiation with landowners. So the detail is set out in the Derbyshire County Council report, which is set out as Appendix 1, which is lengthy but has all the detail in it. And this that report seeks authorisation for the land acquisition, either outright or it could be in terms of rights. So it might be a compulsory rights over drainage, for instance. So that's all through the making of the compulsory purchase order. It also includes the highways changes that need to be made for this development through a side roads order. So they're both in that Cabinet report. And Derbyshire Cabinet approved the making of those orders at their Cabinet meeting on the 27th of July this year. So this report informs you as the you Exec Scrutiny and onto Derby Cabinet and is for noting.
Thank you, Verna. I think I have discussed this with Paul Clark, the Head of Planning, today as it happens, but previously as well. I think the situation is still the same, that we should welcome this initiative. It's potentially massive, both for South Derbyshire and for Derby South, effectively. It's been an interesting area of the city and the South Derbyshire in that this land is owned by various people in a consortium, and there may even be some issues around who owns some of it or getting the corporation of some of it, which is probably why we need to consider a compulsory purchase order. So I understand it's desirable. The desire is not to have to use compulsory purchase powers, but if we do, then obviously that has ramifications in terms of the time taken to deal with all this, and the potential of ransom strips and court cases and all sorts of things if it becomes controversial. But the planning, I understand, is through and past, and even the link road. But the consortium itself doesn't have a very proactive record in relation to this piece of land. But with the new junction and the development in Infinity Park taking off, there is massive potential for this to start to move quickly and be both a great benefit to the city in terms of housing and industrial space and jobs. So it's something we should support, but have that caveat of concern around whether there's a need to resort to the compulsory process order and all that goes with that. So, any other comments, thoughts on it? Yes, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Matthew Oakwood Ward. Quite honest, I'm delighted to see this report has come back. I was a big supporter of it during the previous Cabinet. I'm very pleased to see it's something that we're continuing with and the steps that it's made. It's a very long report, but thankfully it's been raining a lot recently, so I've been able to make my way through the whole thing. Initial reading looks like a very strong set of proposals, but I do have a couple of questions, and obviously, Werner, I appreciate you're here as a substitute for the authors, so if any of them need to be answered by the report authors, that's not a problem at all. So 4.3 states that if a public inquiry is required due to CPOs, we could see a delay to the project. Now, there's often also costs associated with a public inquiry. So if we were to get to that stage, who would the costs be borne by?
Well, that's a good question. As I understand it, then the potential for a public inquiry has been considered within the project timescales and budget. So my understanding is that they are working with that as part of the risk contingency, but I can clarify that for you.
Brilliant, thank you. And obviously, as we've discussed, the most favourable approach is not to have to go through a CPO, it's through discussions with the landowners, and we've heard, obviously, yourself, Chair, have pointed out that's not always been the easiest thing sometimes. Has there been any improvement in discussions recently? How are they going so far?
Again, I don't know the up-to-date, but I think it's a mixed bag, as you would imagine. I think there are some positive conversations and some where we need to continue to pursue them. So hence the requirement for this order. So I think it's a mixed picture, but officers of Derbyshire are still pursuing the negotiated option.
Thank you. And one more, if I may, Chair. The document refers that there are some pieces of land where ownership is entirely unknown. Now, we've a fair few of these in my Oakwood ward, and trying to get a tree maintained on them is difficult enough, never mind trying to get hold of possession of the land. So how does CPOs work in a circumstance where we've no idea essentially who to CPO? And if 20 years down the line somebody finds that the land in question was in a trust somewhere and then a company went bankrupt and somebody passed away and it was essentially lost in the system, what happens at that stage?
I'll definitely have to come back to you on that one, if I may. I'm sure that it refers to it in the report, but I can't remember from this morning now. But forgive me, I'll get back to you on that.
No problem at all, thank you.
I suspect there's probably precedent in CPOs coming across that in the past and have some sort of mechanism for dealing with it, but presumably we'd have to prove that we've done all due diligence to trace and identify the owner, and if we're not able to, then there must be a process, but Werner will feed that back. Okay. Councillor Kerr.
Yeah, there was something like this in neighbouring ward to me in Blakegrave. Sorry, Lucy Kerr, from the councillors. And it's, I think you do, as you said, Chair, due diligence, and then you take out insurance. This report, as most of our reports should have, Cabinet reports should have, has a little roundel giving the climate implications. And although the legal implications are talking about legal implications related to this report, the climate implications, I think, are supposed to reflect the whole of the complete project. And I'm afraid, Chair, that I don't think that this is a very good indication as to what the implications would be for the whole of the project, in that it's saying from the point of view of transport it's +6. Now there will be some journeys that are reduced in length by having this junction, but the general principle is that the more roads you build, the more people drive along them. The more people who come to work in Derby, the more journeys there will be to Derby, which doesn't sound to me as though from a climate perspective it's a positive. From an adaptation perspective, this is considering it to be very negative. And indeed, this is an area with a flood challenge. But the act of doing the development will have considered that flood challenge, and there will be mitigations being built into the work that's going on here to actually mitigate against the challenges of the flooding. So in terms of adaptation, I would have given this greener and the transport redder. So sometimes we get a full analysis as to how this roundel has been put together. We haven't got it here, and I don't know if Cabinet have had it shared with them. I don't think it's something that in any way should stop this project going forward, but I think that from the point of view of good information being provided to Cabinet, there is an issue, and I think it probably reflects additional training being required for our officers.
Thank you, Lucy. I take your point entirely. We shouldn't just give lip service to the fact that we need to look at the climate change implications of what we're doing, but you rightly point out that you can't do this without a bit of concrete and a lot of tarmac in terms of a new junction on the A50, and the priorities and the importance of it. Werner, any observations on the strength of the impact assessment?
And I wasn't party to the decision making, so I can go back and ask the officers involved how they came to those conclusions, and just test and challenge that a bit would seem appropriate. I take on board Councillor Kerr's points. It's a significantly large scheme, and actually doing something like this for such a big scheme is probably quite a challenge. Maybe something we could break down into phases or something like that may make it a more sensible approach. But I'll take it away and have a chat, I think, is probably the best thing I can do.
Thank you. Martin, you wanted to come in?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Oh, sorry. You beat me to it, Martin.
There we are. Thank you, Chair.
I thought I'd
yes, it's. I think it would be really interesting actually to learn a bit more about how the climate change implications are worked out, and I think that would be a good piece of training for all of us as we scrutinise Cabinet papers. So hopefully over time we'll get more detailed as officers and the report authors get more used to working with them. But I think on these projects, as Werner said, it must incredibly difficult where it's such a big project where the scope of it is unknown to a large extent. So far in advance, it's a project over probably 10, 20 years. But I'm sure we can, over time, sort of tweak these and get them as accurate as we can.
Sorry, Martin, to disturb you. We seem to be agreeing that there's a need to look at the effectiveness of the assessment, if you like. Do we want to make it a recommendation that they examine the quality of the climate change impact assessment?
Well, I'd sort of make it as a request for training for us, if it's possible to have a session on, how these assessments are done.
When you say us in exec scrutiny or us as councillors in the training?
Well, councillors in general, really. Yeah, I think that would be helpful.
Can we agree that as a recommendation? You okay with that? Yeah? Okay, sorry. And
then just really to, other than that, to say that I think it's a positive project. I think we should make a recommendation to Cabinet in support of the report in terms of potential for jobs and meeting a lot of the city's housing need in this particular area going forward. So it's good to see it progressing. It is a complicated project involving lots of different stakeholders, so it's always very difficult to manage that. Yes, I'd just like it noted that it's pleasing to see it progressing, Chair.
Okay, so a recommendation and positive support for the report, with the caveat that councillors might benefit from training on the impact assessments. Councillor Mahor, did you want to come in?
Yes, if you don't mind. Thank you, Chair. Councillor Cecile Wright. I want to reiterate what Martin has said. This is indeed a very positive project. And yes, indeed, it is very, very complicated. It's not always we're not always able to discern some of the complexities. One of the questions I'd like to ask, with respect to the equality impact assessment, it does state here under socioeconomic implications 10.2 that at the moment they're developing the tools for doing that. Any idea how long it will take to develop the appropriate tools for the equality assessment? I think it ought to be something that is done as we go, rather than perhaps waiting until the project is completed. Thank you.
We're quite experienced, and officers have been doing equality assessments for a long while. It may be that this is more of an update to the tools for doing so. I don't know that we don't do them properly now. So, Werner, any comments? Thoughts?
And I'll ask when they are going to do one, but I note that it says we are developing an equalities impact assessment that is specific to the project. So I think it's the same methodology. Okay. I think they just need to do it specific to that. So
it's not that we're learning how to do equality assessments. It's we're doing one for this project.
Yeah. That's not what I didn't say that they're not capable of doing it. Okay. I was referring specifically to the needs of this particular project. Chair, thank you.
Okay. Jamie.
Awesome, cheers, Chair. I'll be as quick as I can. Awesome project, brilliant, 5,000 new jobs, 4,500 new homes. I had my first meeting with Derby Homes last week, and it became quite stark that we have a real housing crisis in Derby, so 4,500 new homes was going to be most welcome. But my question is actually to do with 4.3, Werner, and it says at the bottom, the anticipated start date is January 2025 if the public inquiry is required as a result of CPO, or summer 2024 if the land can be secured by agreement. So my question is, if there's already land that has been acquired, is there potential to phase this differently and potentially pull things forward to start sooner? Is that a potential opportunity that we might have?
I doubt it, because it is such a complicated project and it's being done in lots of different phases. Also, the production of the full business case is still underway. So, you know, we're going through the design process at the moment. So we'll get to that point when we've got a full business case. And actually at that point, we have another stop-go opportunity as well to say, you know, do we want to continue with construction, go back and look at all the costs and all the risks and all, so we have another moment there. So I would doubt we would be able to manage to pull it any further forward in time, but it is challenging, and everyone is trying to do everything they can.
I think it's fair to say the timescales are important because of the government grant in relation to the junction in particular. Is time sensitive, shall we say. So I'm sure officers are, well, it's the county that's leading on the junction itself, so I'm sure that they are trying to be timely with it. Okay. Are we all right with the recommendations after that discussion? Yeah, good. All right, then, unless there's anything else, we'll move on to item 9, which is Derby Libraries. I presume, Charlie, you're going to give us some more background to this.
Thanks, Chair. Charles Edwards, Head of Community Safety and Locality Working, and our currently responsible for our library provision. So this report provides an update on our library provision and outlines several options available to the Council on future library models. There's 5 recommendations in the report, and I'll draw this board's attention to 3 of these. So the report recommends Cabinet to agree to the development of detailed business cases for 2 preferred options. Subject to approval of that recommendation, the report further recommends that as the previous EOI process will be superseded, Cabinet should note that that will therefore cease, and that it also recommends that Cabinet agrees that the statutory libraries and the 10 community libraries will be considered together. So we'll look at the whole library provision. Officers have done some initial exploratory work and therefore been able to present 2 preferred options for business case development. The preferred options are to create a new trust to deliver our whole library provision, or to transfer to an existing trust. And there are some other options that have been considered. They are for it to remain in-house but partner with another council, establish a trading company, outsource to existing social enterprise or organisations. That's the previous expression of interest process, a joint venture, or to close community libraries. The appendices that go along with the report show the supporting information for all of the options outlined and detail some advantages and disadvantages for each of those options. I'm happy to take some questions, Chair.
Just a quick one from me, Charlie. In terms of the preferred options of those 2, I presume when you talk about either a new trust or an existing trust, that's to deal with the non-statutory libraries.
The report recommends all of our library provision, Chair. So that would be our 5 statutory and our 10 community libraries.
Because I'm struggling to find the rationale or the advantage from including the 5 statutory libraries that the 2017 Labour proposals identified and brought forward. But maybe other members have got comments in relation to that. Anybody else?
Yeah.
Councillor Kay and then Councillor Eyre.
Chair, I would also be interested to know why it's felt that putting them all together into a trust with both the statutory and the additional libraries is felt to be the right way forward. It doesn't seem to have been fleshed out enough as a concept, because I think it is quite a different idea to where we've been before. Now, I know that sort of public service mutual libraries have been done. I think Nottinghamshire does it and I think Suffolk does it, but it doesn't seem to be anything here that says how well those are doing. I don't know how long they've existed for and why that model is felt to be the right one for now, given that we've got communities within the city, some of which some of which have been working quite hard on putting together the sort of outsourced community interest company type package as a charitable organisation. And I don't want to feel that people who have done quite a lot, invested quite a lot of their volunteer time in putting forward expressions of interest, aren't included in the thinking, because we are going to be really important for those people to be on board in a trust situation utilising volunteers as well as here. So I don't know whether, Chair, if others would feel that there is a potential recommendation about continuing to involve volunteers who have put forward expressions of interest and those sort of nascent organisations, and how to make sure that they are still part of the forward thinking of this. I'm also concerned about whether having a public service mutual, what freedom it would have about closing libraries, which is clearly not an intention here, but would they have the freedom to do that? I don't know who has the ownership of the buildings. Maybe that's something that needs to be defined. They will have to pay VAT, which we don't, which I think is quite a significant thing. But I think the biggest issue for me is the way we seem to be moving down this without consultation with the public as a way forward, and whether we're rushing into something because a decision has to be taken without necessarily bringing the public with us. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to come back to you for comments on Councillor Kerr's thoughts, but yeah, I mean, I get that one of the recommendations is to scrap the expressions of interest process, but it was a useful process in identifying people with interest in the library system and keeping those volunteers that are already involved informed and up to speed. There are all sorts of implications in relation to our current statutory libraries being run by somebody else, the staff that are currently there, GP arrangements and all manner of different things that would need to be considered. Your thoughts?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Councillor, for those comments. I think the point about it not being fleshed out as a concept is fair. What this report asks for is time for officers to flesh out what the recommendations mean for all of the points that have been raised. It's not a definitive decision here in terms of Cabinet agreeing to go down one of those routes. It's just to flesh out some of the detail. I think you're right, Chair, in terms of the expression of interest process. It was a good process, and what we found from that is a strong appetite from our community voluntary sector, some of our friends groups, to keep libraries open and accessible. So this report and the work that officers will do going forward will retain volunteers and our community organisations at the forefront. So we still want them to be involved in whatever the future model for our libraries ends up being. They'll be at the centre of that.
Okay, I hear that plea for more time, but the more time leads to more uncertainty for the volunteers and the danger of losing them along the way. But also importantly, it increases the cost. The costs in terms of maintaining community involvement now in maintaining all libraries open is not insignificant. I think maybe other people have got thoughts on that. Councillor, you wanted to come in?
I think, Chair, Councillor Wright just beat me first.
Right. Councillor Wright. I think some of the observations already been raised, but I just wanted to say that I do very much welcome the fact that the Cabinet is acting on one of the manifesto pledges, really was to look at and created an effective, engaging and accessible library services for our population in the City of Derby. So I do welcome that. I suspect that the city in due course will be applying to become a city of culture somewhere down the line. And one of the main tenets of exhibiting that you are indeed a culturally vibrant city is to have an effective, engaging library provision. And whatever option we come up with, and I think if we need the time in order to flesh that out, we ought to take the time to do so, that we get something that is efficient and effective for the City of Derby.
I don't think anybody in this room would deny the importance of an effective and good library system. Unfortunately, this doesn't appear to be the answer at this stage. It's just more like work in progress along previous lines. But Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. Members on here may well know that my contributions to various meetings on libraries has never been brief, and this one will not be either. But I will start by saying I agree with everything yourself and Councillor Kerr said there about the impact of ending the expression of interest process, and I'd certainly be willing to support any recommendation that came from that. So reading this report, I'll be honest and say it's not quite what I expected to come forward. I expected the administration to go down a different route, as this marks quite a large diversion away from the 2017 library policy that Labour signed up to and the previous administration inherited and was working with, and from which we were forging a new path. Now, of course, I was a supporter of the previous expression of interest process, which ceases under this report. I mean, you would expect me to support that process, as I was the cabinet member that brought it through. I felt that process provided certainty by being a 6-month turnaround with clearly defined aims and ambitions. All costs were covered in the budget that was allocated. There was buy-in to the council services for successful applicants. It ensured all the libraries remained open, and it freed up costs at a later date to provide additional library funds. And we saw there was significant interest in the process from library volunteers, from the community and voluntary sector, and beyond from there. As the report notes, consultation had been done and listened to. The EOI stage 1 was already completed. The outcome was exactly the kind of thing we would have wanted to see. So the new administration inherited an almost complete process and indeed started the second stage of the process before changing their mind. There, we would have been providing certainty to library users and library volunteers within the next 2 months. That's when the EOI process would have been set to conclude. I don't support the ending of that process, but I entirely accept the new administration's right to do so. And I would propose a recommendation asking them to change their mind, but I don't think there'd be much point in that this time. Now, there are elements of this new proposal that would have been delivered under the previous EOI process that I'm very, very pleased to see are included in this proposal. So it talks about greater involvement of volunteers, and all of us here with community libraries in our ward will know what an amazing job our volunteers do. Now, I do believe from talking to volunteers at various libraries, they were stifled under the 2017 agreement. The steering committees that were set up didn't have much power or ability to really steer the libraries, despite the ideas and intentions that volunteers had, and I don't think that was right. They would talk about increasing freedom, physical autonomy and creativity, a key element of the previous process, especially around the community hub models, which I hope will not be abandoned, and that with the election now over will be treated with the seriousness that I think that proposal actually deserves. It talks about greater involvement of friends groups, and every volunteer I've spoken to wants greater involvement of friends groups at libraries, and again, that was really important to the previous process. And it talks about the book fund element for libraries for future models as well. Now, under this proposal, I do believe that comes later than it would have come under the previous one, because this proposal will no longer permit the usage of what would have been there as business rates, because, of course, charities do not pay business rates where councils do. So the libraries were back with the council incurring the business rates, and having been transferred out again, the business rates most likely then would no longer be needed to be paid. So that money can then no longer be freed up for use in other ways. Now, I'm not against any of the elements there that I've just set out. They would all have been delivered under the previous EOI, and it's positive that this administration has decided to keep them as part of what's been progressed here. Now, the PSM model is very interesting. It's going to require significant further investigation through the business plans to develop and determine the suitability, viability, workability, sustainability, and affordability of the model, and whether it actually is a fit or even the right fit for Derby. It must be said, however, that to call the model sustainable, when the affordability, viability, suitability, workability, sustainability, and the level of public support, staff and volunteer support for the model is unknown, is, I think, incredibly premature. And it does look like the report is passing the consultation that was done in January and February on a different library model as a consultation on this model, and I don't think that's the right way things should be going about. At this stage, I also think that it's worth pointing out that the process now being embarked on would not have been possible without our decision to bring the libraries back in-house in March 2023, following the withdrawal of the previous operator, and it wouldn't be possible without the increased budget that we provided in March 2023 when we were the only party to support that. I doubt the new administration will ever thank us for that, but they're welcome for it anyway. Now, we do, however, need to remind ourselves of the standard that was set by the now administration when they were in opposition. Because when I came into the chamber in February 2023 and spelt out how long an EOI process would take, how much it would cost, how much each budget was per year, what we were looking for, and more, in my last long speech on libraries, I was accused of creating uncertainty. Now, we were in an election period, there was politicking going on, and I do understand that. But if I was held to that standard, what happens if I now hold the new administration to the standard they set? And of course, I accept business cases need to be done, but if my explanation in February was uncertain, despite all the specifics that it included, this must be about as uncertain as it would get. Because the report that's before us, and again, I accept business cases need to be done, and if you like, this is the first stage of embarking on a process. We're not even sure which way of the two ways listed in this that we will go. But it contains a lot of elements that suggest to me there will be substantial increases in cost, with no projection of figures, and no detail about how any of it will specifically be paid for, or indeed the details on timescales that I would have wanted to have seen. So for comparison, in February, I talked specific costs, specific budgets, specific timeframes. This report does not. And I'm only following the standards set by others to judge our proposals, to allow me to judge their proposals on their own standards. Now, I think this is incredibly important, and I accept entirely the statement in the report that PSMs should not be looked at from a cost-cutting perspective and should never set an organisation up to fail. And I would also hope there are no plans to allow budgets to explode on expensive legal fees and consultants. But it is right, especially given the context that will be set out in a later report before us today on DCC finances, that we as an executive scrutiny committee look at this from a risk of cost spiralling perspective. Now, the report makes repeated references to library staff and library employees, but outside of the statutory libraries, we don't have very many staff, as the 2017 decision taken by the then Labour administration converted us to volunteers and removed the staff from places like Oakwood, Spondon, Allestree, Chellaston, and our other community-managed libraries. Now, I don't see details in this report on how many more staff we think we'll be hiring and how much that will cost. The report outlines there may be significant costs to change. Now, what does the word significant mean? We know it doesn't mean minuscule, we know it doesn't mean pennies. And are we 100% certain of the affordability of it within the budget that was set? Is it within the budget that was set, which was sufficient to cover the previous process and provide additional for libraries? Or does more needed to be added to it, and if so, where do we plan to get that from? We're told in the report that staff rarely possess all the skills and capabilities to operate a PSM. Now, that's not my words, that's the words of the report. And I know volunteers did have some concerns about whether it was going to be them taking the role of the operator in the model that existed previously. So who are we bringing in who either has the skills or can train others to have the skills? And again, how much do we think that will cost? We've heard already about VAT, corporation tax as well, having to be paid by a new organisation. Again, what will the cost be around those? And there's also a risk, as it states in the report, of over-reliance on the core contract, which can stifle efforts to raise money and finances through other means. Some have told me these were concerns with the 2017 proposals as well. Now, I'm not expecting answers to these questions right now. They all need to be fleshed out in the business plans. But we, as a scrutiny board, have to ensure Cabinet are aware and are considering these things. And at this stage, I do not see anything that gives me the confidence to confirm that this policy and plan is definitely affordable, and that the administration should just admit to that if that's the case that we're being in. What does concern me is we see a recommendation that DCC just incur the costs as necessary, and a statement 7.1 that the budget pressure will be managed using non-essential spend across the wider service area. Now, I'd welcome, and we as a committee should be requesting more detail on what that means. What will be cut and by how much? Who will be cut and by how much? Predictions first and then the realities afterwards. We must also bear in mind the legal costs that are stated in this report, and let's face it, legal advice has never come cheap. We then need to look at some of the messaging that has gone out recently as well. Now, what I've seen on social media is comments from at least one member of the administration about how we are going to have the Suffolk model. Well, one, we're not sure about that because we've got two models listed in here, and I've read Suffolk's cabinet reports on libraries, and not only do they talk about a 2-year consultation timeframe, which, you know, we're turning 6 months into 2 years, but there are also no plans I'm aware of to introduce 30 additional libraries, home libraries and portable libraries. So this might be Suffolk style, but we can't claim it's a direct mirror. But the Suffolk style does talk in depth about moving from book focus to books and beyond, with community hub libraries located alongside other services such as youth services, leisure services and children's services. Now, if anybody recognises that idea, it's because that's exactly what I repeatedly laid out under the previous expression of interest at Cabinet, in press statements and at full council, which the new administration previously criticised and lamented. Now, it's nice to see them catch up with our ideas, even if passing them off as their own. Perhaps the renewed ambition that the document talks about is just their catching up with the previous administration's ambitions. Now, my other concern is this is in effect, and Councillor Kerr alluded to this, and yourself did, Chair, this is in effect an experiment. The government website states there are 115 PSMs in the country. It's actually the next statement after what was quoted in the document. We've got 115 PSMs in the country. It doesn't state how many operate libraries, and I'm not aware of any detail of that in this report, or any comparators in any way, shape, or form. Certainly not included in this report. Now, to place our 5 statutory libraries into this from the start, rather than further down the line after proper assessment of the PSM models, when these 5 libraries have confirmed operators and did not see the operator withdrawal that the 10 community-managed libraries experienced, I feel is incredibly risky. It ramps up uncertainty at these sites as to what their model of delivery will be, and I really, really hope it will not turn out to be a mistake. So to start bringing this to a conclusion, Chair, and I'm sure members will be glad to hear this is concluding, I know the new administration will not agree with everything, if anything at all, that I've said. But whether they believe it or not, my comments are actually meant to be helpful. I don't sit on this committee to blindly support or wave something through. I sit here to analyse, scrutinise and highlight alternatives. In my year as the Cabinet Member for Libraries, I have the privilege of meeting tens, if not hundreds, of library volunteers and library users across our city. They are amazing people with amazing ideas, and it is them I'm thinking about, and we should all be thinking about in what goes through. I worked with officers to design a process that would deliver sustainable services with costs and processes fully explained. The administration is set to end this process and embark on a different route, which thankfully has a lot of similarities for all the concerns I've just expressed. I accept the administration's right to do that, and I am genuinely hoping they will succeed. This is not about individuals, and there's no right or wrong way to run libraries. There are hundreds of different models across the country and indeed across the world. I don't believe the 2017 model got it right. We were working to fix that. I wanted to deliver a model that did, and that ability is now in the administration's hands. But I believe they need to be honest about the finances behind this. Do not let costs spiral in the way this report, I feel, suggests they would, and do not bankrupt the service or the council by trying to put the administration's name on it. Now, I do have 2 recommendations, Chair, but I'm happy to pause if anyone else wants to speak first.
Shall we get some comments on your contribution? But I'm going to put them back to Charlie for starters. 3 important factors there. One is this costs. Basically, the Cabinet are being asked to accept the recommendation that in conjunction with the Strategic Director and the Cabinet member responsible, that they raise costs as necessary from somewhere else. Is that a satisfactory situation? And then also, can we have some clarity on the consultation proposals, or whether we're going to rely on the previous consultation over a different model? And then some clarity over the GDPR issues, because if we're going to go to a different organisation running them, we haven't in 10 years, not 10 years, I'm exaggerating, 5 or 6 years, resolve the GDPR issues to be able to help them to make it work. So your comments on those 3 factors?
So finances, the external legal fees, that's what the additional finances may be is external legal fees. We don't have the expertise internally to explore what these options would be. Subject to any decision that's made Wednesday, we would be putting together a bit of a business case for to tender out to legal organisations for their costs. We don't know what those costs are yet, which is why they've not been included in this report. There'll be, within the delegated approvals to the strategic director, which is why we've put that sort of line in there to make reference that there will be additional fees. We just don't know what they are or are going to be. In terms of Councillor Ayre's point about managing finances within service budgets, I think that's fair, and I'm more than happy to bring back to this board how we will do that and where that will be managed from. But in terms of the project, we believe that the costs, aside of the external legal fees, we believe the costs can be managed within the budget that's been set aside for community libraries, our library budgets, and the wider services that are within my sort of accountabilities. Consultation, yes, we will be doing further consultation with volunteers, residents, stakeholders. Again, what this report is asking for is for us to develop detailed business cases for 2 preferred options, and as part of those business cases, consultation will be conducted. In terms of GDPR, I'll have to come back to you on that. One of the benefits of putting the library provision together, so the 5 and the 10 community libraries, is that we overcome some of those GDPR issues. The previous challenges was the interlink between our statutory provision and a provision managed by somebody else, whereas if this was a trust, that would ease. But again, the external legal advice that we will be seeking to guide us on this will be able to advise us on that.
Clearly, there's a distinct lack of timescales in there. If we are going to go out to consultation and not rely on the previous one, as has been mentioned, previous authorities have taken 2 years of the process. We don't actually know, I suspect, what the running costs are now that DHA are out of it and we're helping running volunteers. You say you're confident you can deal with it within budgets, but we don't know what the costs are. So to go for 2 more years while you consult again over your options is dangerous. That's what Councillor Ayre is saying in relation to. Yes, come back.
Yes, Jeff, I can just briefly come back on that, just on something Charlie mentioned there. So just taking again that point at 7.1, so the budget pressure will be managed using non-essential spend budgets across the wider service area. Now, part of me had thought that might have been within just the library's budget, which, Charlie, correct me if I'm wrong, is about 1.5 million in the library's budget. Are we saying then that that's actually a wider budget across your whole service area, so not just Central Library's budget, it's the other budgets as well, because obviously they're vastly different figures, one far bigger than the other.
Firstly, we'll be looking within the library budget. As you know, as a previous cabinet member, those budgets are really under pressure anyway. But we do believe that it can be managed within those budgets.
So just to come back, that's those budgets being the library budgets, or those budgets being the multiple budgets?
Library budgets.
Initially, by the sound of it. I have to say, it sounds like you don't really know where the money's going to come from or how much it's going to cost, which is the reason for the concern. And there's certainly some need for clarity on the consultation process, the timescales and GDPR. Has anybody else got something in here, Councillor? Sorry, go on, Councillor Bolton.
Sarah Bolton, Labour Councillor for Blakeries Ward. Whilst I welcome this report, obviously I think we all should welcome that we're going to try and keep all our libraries open. But can I ask the officer if we will be having a follow-up report to this?
Yes, we will do.
Good, thank you very much, Charlie. That's the answer I wanted. Nevertheless, having heard contributions from the Chamber this evening, and knowing myself from the people I've spoken to in Blakeries Ward over recent months, and indeed visited the library to thank our volunteers who open it up on the days of the week. And the volunteers, as has been said by previous councillors, the volunteers do a good job and we thank them for that. Obviously there will be a role for them in the future. Libraries, as Councillor Wright mentioned in her delivery, are a community hub. And I know from visiting Blakery's ward that people who are socially isolated visit there. People who haven't got access to computer visit the library. And Saturday mornings, Blakery's ward library is now open, and obviously that encourages people of all ages, especially children, to attend a library. So let's not beat about the bush. Our manifesto said we were going to save the libraries. We are meeting that manifesto pledge, Chair, whether you like it or not. The debate here is bringing back memories of the last meeting where we brought a report to save Ashgate Nursery. Obviously that was something that the previous administration wanted to close. This is another similar situation. We will be successful.
Chair, just to jump in there was no manifesto commitment in the Conservatives' manifesto to close libraries. Now made repeated statements to the contrary on at least 4 occasions.
No, the manifesto is in our manifesto. I wasn't talking about the Conservative. Conservatives were on about closing Ashgate Nursery, and the Conservatives wanted to close the libraries.
I literally just corrected that.
I make
sorry,
no
Chair,
sorry,
Councillor. I think I agree with what you're saying, Councillor Bolton. You talk about the people involved, but they do deserve as much clarity on the situation as possible. And laudable as it is, whether or not we all intended to keep all the libraries or not, I'm afraid it appears that this particular paper doesn't offer the certainty that they need and doesn't offer any clarity or timescales or financial governance or clarity on consultation or GDPR. So whilst it's laudable, it's not the answer yet.
Okay. Is it okay if I can continue? Thank you. I know the Friends of Blakery's Library met last week. And I know from a ward aspect, I can't speak for other councillors, but clearly I would have thought they would have had roles within their Friends of Libraries, as I'm sure they do. And where possible, we reassure and thank them for the work they do. That's just showing how grateful we are. But having heard from the officer, Charlie has already told us that this report will be coming back. We're unsure when, but obviously let's live in hope and let's be positive that the 2 preferred options, as outlined in this report, will be successful and we can make choices, and the Cabinet member responsible will clearly be doing that on behalf of the citizens of Derby. Libraries are a great source for all wards, as you know in your ward, Chair, in Spondon. That is a hub not only for people, it's a meeting place for other groups. And this is what we want in all our wards, and particularly, obviously, the ward I represent in Blakereeves. As far as consultation goes, from the people I've spoken to in the last few months, obviously, if you say to them, do you want Blakereeves Library to close? What's the obvious answer is no. So clearly that is the consultation that all members will be having in their own. Nobody wants to see a facility close, whether it be a nursery or whether it be a library. Once a building is closed, it is very, very difficult to get that open again, as I know from experience. We want to deliver services, we want them delivered correctly, and I'm sure when we have our next report that Charlie's already said will come back to this committee, we will be looking at the options with perhaps more detail, but on the whole, let's be positive. We are keeping services open, and that's what the people in Derby want.
Sorry, just to come back to you again, Councillor Bolton. I asked Charlie his thoughts on this, but we won't be consulting as to whether or not we want libraries to be open or not. The consultation will be around which of the 2 preferred options, business cases, have been built up. They haven't been consulted on those options yet because they are going to be new, so there has to be some consultation on the subject. And rather than let's live in hope, I would like as much certainty as possible around the arrangements. And what I'm suggesting is that, in my view, looking at it as it stands now, it doesn't give us the security and solutions and timescales necessary. Right, yes. Do you want to come back on that, Charlie?
Yeah, just to add, Chair, the certainty we can give this board is that libraries will remain open and accessible whilst this project is underway. So there'll be no change to any of our library provision. In fact, you know, the service that we're providing from some of the community libraries is improving since they've come back in terms of accessibility. So I can give you that reassurance that that is a certainty, and a further report will come back to this board as and when we've got that detail that we can share.
Okay. Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think the points that have been made this evening very well. There are questions, obviously, because this is a paper that introduces a new concept, and it's an enabling cabinet paper to allow the officers to go away, do the work, and come back with the answers to a lot of the questions that we've raised this evening. So I think that's fine. That's what we'd expect to happen. That's how this and other councils operate. But absolutely, it's right for us to have those questions and to ask them. And when the report comes back, we'll have the opportunity to have those answered. I think, as Charlie said, the certainty is there in that the library provision will continue. That's guaranteed. There'll be no changes to library provision while this is going on and while any consultation's taking place. So that's a real positive. And I think what we can look forward to, and what probably we all want to get to, is to arrive at a model that is sustainable, and that means we're not going to have to keep coming back and revisiting it every few years because voluntary sector isn't able to deliver under the terms, pulls out. So we need to get to a point where we have a stable service that can deliver into the future. And I think where we can be positive about that, Chair, is the Derby Museums Trust, which in some way could be a very good example as to how this may evolve. They've been extremely successful since they've become a trust in terms of attracting extra funds into the city from the lottery and elsewhere. They've developed the Museum of Making, and I know they've got plans for from their other site as well. So yes, we've got questions, and we'll hopefully have those answered when the following cabinet paper comes back. But I do see that there is a lot of potential there, and we've got an example to follow in the Museums Trust. Yeah. Thank you.
Take your point on that, Martin, and it's a laudable ambition, and the guarantee that library services won't change is fine, maybe with two potential effects on that. One is the cost. You can't guarantee it without having due regard to the costs of maintaining it as it is now, which I suggest must be much more than what they currently are and what's budgeted for. But more crucially, you can't afford to go maybe 2 years and further consultation and debate about which option and lose the volunteers who are the crux and the way that these libraries are going to maintain them. So I would just urge caution on those sort of things. Right, you said you mentioned recommendations, Councillor.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I'll just quickly start off with a point of agreement. I do entirely agree with the previous speakers that it is fantastic that all libraries are remaining open. Absolutely agree with that. And as I say, it is with the budget that we allocated under the plan that we commenced. But across all my visits to speak with library users and volunteers, one thing came up consistently, and that was that library volunteers, who, as we've all discussed, hard-working people giving up their spare time to support a crucial service, feel hamstrung, restricted and constrained by our policies on GDPR when it came to library membership and library cards. Now, I won't explain all of everything that was said to me, some of which was said in confidence and much of which is very specific. But it was something I was looking at. I know, Charlie, you and I had various discussions on it, and something I think the new administration ought to pay close attention to. So my recommendation, and I'll email a copy of it over, is that as part of the preparation of business cases, Derby City Council consults with councillors and library volunteers to better understand existing concerns surrounding the impact of general data protection regulations on the work of library volunteers, particularly with regard to library cards, with a view to improving the efficiency of the service. I hope that's non-controversial. I don't want to ascribe or prescribe a specific way of doing things, but I think it needs to be on the radar to look at the things that didn't go right in 2017. And I believe Councillor Mulhall is willing to second me. Well, thanks, Chair. I'll get a copy of that sent over. So, second recommendation, and obviously we've heard that another report is going to come back. I think that's really good, but I think it's also needs to be clear that we, as an executive scrutiny role, have a role to play in forming the shape of that report and how information is provided to us. So the recommendation I've got is that any and all associated costs with the decisions in the present report, including but not limited to legal fees, fees for associated advice, increase in staff costs, increase in running cost and others, are brought back to executive scrutiny in a subsequent report and are brought before the most appropriate scrutiny committee, accompanied by details of any budgetary changes to secure funding to be properly examined. Now, the reason I've not been specific there on which scrutiny committee is that obviously libraries used to go to the Communities Board. I believe they're now going to go to another board, and I think that's still something that's being discussed between chairs of various other scrutiny boards. So I don't want to prescribe a specific scrutiny board to the recommendation.
Does anybody see a problem with that recommendation? Can be agreed? Unanimously agreed. Okay.
And just for the record, Chair, I believe Councillor Mulhall seconded me on that one as well.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? Yes, Councillor Kerr.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I've been listening very carefully to some of the points, particularly the points that have been highlighted in our discussion. And I've actually got 4 points which I've kept separate because people can agree or disagree with them, take forward as recommendations. So shall I go through those, Chair? First, to ask Cabinet to ensure that the proposed further work is not dogmatic as to whether the statutory libraries should be in or out of any new arrangement.
For them to consider flexibility on whether to include statutory libraries or not.
Yes, Chair. It was one of the comments that came back as to why we are now putting all the statutory libraries into the same model before that model has been proven. Could it be risky? So it's asking for that further work not to be prejudge. You can have not to prejudge, if you like, rather than dogmatic. Not to prejudge whether there's.
Yeah, I think, Chair, if the wording was changed to not to prejudge and to give it openness and flexibility, perhaps without using the word dogmatic, I'd be okay to second that.
Any objections? Prejudge.
Do you want to take a vote on that now, or?
Oh, there's no objections.
No objections. Okay. The second one is to ask Cabinet to ensure that meaningful consultation is ongoing with Friends of Libraries groups in the options work that is being explored now. And the office has said virtually that.
Chair, can I propose a potential addition to that one?
I'm okay with that one because I think Cabinet will say we'll do that anyway, but...
Can I suggest it says Friends of Library groups and library users? And again, I'd be willing to second that.
Could I suggest that some indication of timescales would be an advantage as well?
Chair, shall I do my third one?
Yes.
To ask Cabinet to agree a clearer budget for the ongoing work and to clarify a timetable for the future arrangements for library management, including the next report back to Cabinet.
I think the finances have been covered in the other recommendation. There's probably more specific than yours. Timescales. I think timescales across the proposal. Really, I know it's okay. Charlie's saying no reports coming back, but I just think it's important for partners and people and the public to understand how long this might take, yeah?
Yeah, I think that's fair, Chair, yeah.
Again, Chair, I'm happy to second that.
Okay.
The recommendation we've already agreed, Chair, on finance will not come back to us until some additional work has been done. Whereas we've heard today that we're giving open the option to spending up to the cabinet limit, which I believe is £250,000. So there is an option available. The agreement at the moment is to say up to £250,000 can be spent on exploring this.
To be honest, I didn't read the cabinet limit. I read it costs as necessary.
Yeah, but we've also been assured by the officer that he's not expecting to come back to cabinet, but that gives an upper limit of £250,000. I would like...
That depends where you get which budget he gets it from, to be honest. So I'm not sure that would be an effective...
So, well, I'm just thinking, Chair, I would like cabinet to agree at this point to agree a clearer budget for the ongoing work, rather than leaving it as open as it is.
I think, would it be helpful if I read out my one again, just to see if... So that any and all associated... that any and all costs associated with the decisions in this report, including but not limited to legal fees, fees for associated advice, increase in staff cost, increase in running cost and others, are brought back to executive scrutiny in a subsequent report and are brought before the most appropriate scrutiny committee, accompanied by details of any budgetary changes to secure funding to be properly examined.
I think that'll cover that bit, yeah.
Okay, people
What's
feel
your fourth one,
not the
Lucy?
same thing, that's fine. So just leave that as to ask Cabinet to clarify a timetable for the future arrangements for library management, including the next report back to Cabinet.
And I'm happy to second that.
Timetables are important for me. Any objection to that one?
No.
Okay.
And
agreed.
the final one, Chair,
Is that 5?
No, that was 4. I've just chopped half of 4 off.
Okay.
Sorry, this is the fourth one. Sorry, that was the third one.
So 4.5.
To ask Cabinet to include a third option to be explored of a community interest / charity basis for library organisation, which would fit the pattern that Friends of Libraries have generally been exploring, whether just for community libraries or for these plus statutory libraries. And that's probably the option given in 6.4.
That sounds like asking them to go back and reconsider what they've already changed their minds on that we were proposing to do. So I don't think we're likely to get a response in relation to that unless anybody else has got any thoughts.
Chair, it's saying that there has been a lot of work done in this city already, and shouldn't we actually be mindful of that before we throw out the baby with the bathwater?
Well, Lucy, as Councillor acknowledged, the new administration have the right to take this the path that they consider fit, and that's not what they're considering. So I don't think we've got agreement on that one. Okay, good. Anything else before we move on? Oh, thank you very much. Good debate and well received, and hopefully productive towards getting the best out of the process. Okay, moving on then. Item 10, further integration between the county and the city and county and community health services.
Yeah, I'm dealing with that one. So I'm Kirsty McMillan, Director of NHS Integration here at the Council. So the report that's going to Cabinet on Wednesday, I believe, is about permission to start some consultation which would see some services the Council provide and also those provided by Derbyshire Community Health Services come closer together and form a formal partnership. And so the report sets out the legal basis on which this would take place, and it's known under the relevant piece of legislation as a Section 75 agreement. And what the report is asking is permission to start the consultation, but also to receive a further report after the consultation, and at a point at which any decision was taken, that consultation is given due consideration. Do you want me to go through the details of the sorts of services, or?
Kirsty, I think a lot of us are, hopefully most of us are aware of the changes and the positive aspects of the changes. Shall we take any questions and comments and then see if you need to expand any deeper? Thoughts, comments, questions? Councillor Wright?
Yes, Councillor Wright. Just wanted to say that I really welcome this report. Today, over the news, one of the items that have been raised relates to health, providing health provision over the coming winter, and the worry that our health service may not be in a position to cope. And part of that is linked to the disparity that there is between acute and social or integrated. So I think this proposal, this idea, I think, in terms of providing health care for our people here in Derby would be very useful in terms of the much desired integration between the acute and other forms of health service delivery. So I do welcome this paper, and I welcome the fact that it is indeed a potential exploration of the services coming together and working together, with the fact that further, more developed, worked up proposal will come to us as a committee. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, Councillor Kerr and then Councillor Khan.
Yeah, I think this is a common sense approach. We need to be working more closely within the different organisations. And this is a good example of where closer working should bring real benefits both to recipients of care and also the organisation and the staff and so on. So I hope it works and all the IT issues and things like that will not be too challenging as things go forward. As part of that integration, I'm not sure whether there will have already been conversations had about the role of public health and public health messaging as part of this, because we know that it's so important to make use of every contact to be able to get across those healthy living type messages. And this is another example where we can be doing that. So I just wanted to ask whether we're including the links with public health and how they would be disseminated to the practitioners on the front line.
Yeah, I mean, obviously this report is about doing the consultation, but we could certainly ensure that public health are party to the consultation to give their ideas, because you're absolutely right. One of the rationales for bringing health and care together, partly to make it much more simple for local people, but actually it's a good platform then to have other conversations with them. So yeah, I'm happy to make sure that when we do the consultation, it sets out on 5.1 the sorts of people that we'd be talking to, absolutely talking to. We've got the Council's Health and Care Scrutiny Committee down there anyway, but I can make sure that we have a specific focus on what public health messaging, as Lucy's described, you know, would be one of the benefits from this.
Councillor Jangir Khan, I just want to know that this consultation, is it just going to be online, and how well is it's going to cover the city of Derby in ward like mine or a Breetham, and also some of the reports that public health has regarding health, will they be included in it? Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. It's definitely not just going to be online, because that only really works for some people, doesn't work for everybody. The sorts of people who use these services are generally older and generally people more likely to be affected by health inequalities. So over the summer, that's why we're taking a bit of time on this. We will try and go to any opportunity there is to have a conversation with people. So I think what we'll end up doing is having an online questionnaire, because that's a quick way of just getting information out more generally. But the questions there will then be used as sort of discussion points, and we'll have to capture that in a variety of different ways. Because absolutely what we want is to hear from the people who are most likely to use the services, and they're not necessarily on the council's website looking for consultation responses.
Good. Moving on then. We're going to go to item 11, which is the draft Q1 financial monitoring.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Tony Nash, I'm Head of Finance. So this report outlines the Council's financial forecast position at Q1. Section 4.1 of the report looks at the national context and outlines multiple main considerations facing local government finances at this time. The revenue outturn position is outlined in Section 4.2, given a summary table by Directorate. There is a forecast overspend of 6.091 million at Q1. For illustrative purposes, the use of reserves has been outlined to facilitate a balanced position, but this is not without risk. 3.350 million from the General Reserve and 2.741 million from the Budget Risk Reserve. There will be continued focus throughout the year on spending panels, spending moratoriums and vacancy control to help ensure the Council delivers a balanced position and mitigate any potential use of reserves. There will also be an ongoing reserves check and challenge of commitments and use to potentially free up resources to fund any final outturn pressure. The overspend currently assumes that the pay pressure of circa 3.4 million over and above that contained within the base budgets will require a drawdown from reserves, but this is still to be considered, and opportunities for the service to absorb this pressure will be looked at in the coming weeks. Section 4.2.4 shows a summary of the outturn across 6 main themes for the Council, for example, the pay award net pressure and emergent unbudgeted pressures. Section 4.2.5 to 4.258 adds some real detail to the 6 main themes contributing to the forecast pressure, with Appendix 7 breaking this down into a detailed spreadsheet. The capital monitoring is summarised in Section 4.5 and shows a revised forecast spend of 226 million for the year. The main variances to the budgets are highlighted in Section 4.5.6 of the report, and the detailed changes and explanations for them are outlined in Appendix 2. Section 4.6 outlines the TM position and the net debt position of the Council. Section 4.7 gives a brief update of the HRA position, which is currently forecast on target. And Section 4.8 outlines the DST position with a lot of detail to follow on from that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Tony. Quite a brief summary of the content of what is a complicated report. Any thoughts and comments from the floor firstly? Councillor Kerr.
Chair, this really reflects on how really challenging the Council's budget situation is at the moment, and how important it is that everyone, wherever they are in the Council, is mindful of the need and the tightness of the budget, so they can contribute in some small way to try and address the challenge that's there. The introduction has been delivered in, I think, a very calm and measured manner, which I think is out of step really with the message that's underlying here. And it's not just the message of eating into reserves to levels below which we should be going. It's also on the capital front. We've spent 7.5% of our capital budget for this year in the first 25% of the year. And that's before we get to the summer holiday period when more people will be away, or the Christmas period when holidays are longer. So I am really doubtful that we will actually deliver 100%, or what is it, 96% or something like that of our capital spend expected for this year. And I think we need to learn as a council to actually be more open and pragmatic about where our capital spend is likely to slip, because it, and then in some cases, will enable us to make other decisions and other ways of using some of that headroom. So if we can have a more pragmatic approach maybe at the end of the next quarter to how we're going with our capital spend, that is something that I would hope. The dedicated schools situation talks about a current deficit of 15 million. Now, is that hidden within the surpluses that are there as well? Because otherwise I can't quite see how it's being funded, and I'd appreciate some more explanation as to how that works. And specifically on page 24, there's a reference to a community energy saving project which isn't now going ahead, and I wondered what that was.
Perhaps Tony, you could address those specific points, DSG and the community savings.
Yes, Chair. What is the question around DSG? Sorry.
There's a reference to a deficit of £15 million. I think it's probably associated with the high needs block, and how that is going to be funded. Do we have to put that into the dedicated schools budget, despite some schools having a surplus which is held within that account?
So the current pressure being reported on the DSG is a forecast 10.85 million of an initial unmitigated deficit of 12.225. So we thought we were going to have an unmitigated deficit of 12.225, but it's currently being reported as 10.85. That's a 1.375 million reduction to the unmitigated budget.
Chair, I probably misremembered the figure then, but 12 million still seems to be quite a large number.
Which project is it? So that's been withdrawn to support other expenditure within the capital programme.
Chair, I wondered what it had been before it was withdrawn. What are we no longer doing?
I can get you some more detail on that, Lucy. I'll have to email it to you. Sorry, Councillor Kerr.
Councillor Holmes.
Thank you, Chair. Can I draw your attention to 4.59 and 4.510, which is on page 17? Just a quick question, really. Probably not for an answer now, as I'm not sure an officer will be able to tell me, but certainly if it could be explained. The adjustment / clawbacks / expired 106 contributions over £1 million. Could we have some detail, or could I have, all of us have some detail on what that actually is? I do hope it's not timed out and we've lost £1 million that could have been spent in a community somewhere or on a scheme. So yeah, it's 106, which is something that is a concern for many councillors over many years in terms of transparency and understanding of how it's being managed within the council. And I've got growing concerns over very large amounts of 106 in my ward of Mickleover at the moment. So just like to have a look at that if possible, Chair, just to have the detail on it. Thanks.
Yes, I can get you that detail. I'll email you that over.
So more generally from me, around the whole picture, Tony, you've been accused of presenting it relatively positively. It's not a good outturn, is it, at the end of the day? One of the things that previous administrations have been, well, two of them have been criticised about is about the use of reserves and the lack of progress in the capital programme. Well, both of those are highlighted here in that the proposal is to deal with the 6.09 million overspend by way of using the reserves, using two reserves. What does that mean for the level of reserves left? And if next quarter there's an overspend of a similar nature, how will we deal with that?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Good question. I've used it as an illustration because we have to balance the budget. So at Q1, I would have to say where that overspend was coming from. So I have tried to explain in the report it's an illustration, but what we have got to do is work on further plans to mitigate these overspends in the coming weeks and months to make sure that we're not going to spend as much in the future. The impact on reserves is outlined in Appendix 1, but by using that much of the budget risk reserve, it would send your balance to nothing. That's why I've had to eat into the general reserve for the illustration.
And I just reiterate the point that, and I have to say, we were criticised for the use of reserves, and it seems to be an ongoing situation, if not even worse. And the capital programme, I think Councillor Kerr pointed out the percentage of the capital programme spend so far, and that's, you know, the capital programme is vital to the progress of the city as well. So, what's your view in relation to the capital spend?
Quite often, most years, if not all years, most of the actual spend happens in the last quarter of the year. So I can get you some assurances around those figures for previous years. Some
projections would probably be helpful, but you see, it doesn't all stop there, does it? Somewhere in I don't know the number, but in the report it refers to pressures, financial pressures from unachieved savings, projected savings of £1 million. What it does, and the report as a whole highlights the pressures, it highlights the problems, but it doesn't offer any solutions or potential savings.
Chair, there are mitigations outlined for each directorate within the report, but it is highlighting the fact that we've got to work on further plans going forward to make sure we reduce this forecast 6.091 overspend.
I guess some of the reason for my concern in all this is, in that unachieved savings, for example, I think it's nearly £200,000 potential saving on the front desk in the council house. We know that that's been taken out, but we don't know how that's going to be paid for. We know that the quad have had £150,000, but we don't know how that's going to be paid for. We know that Ashgate Nursery, we don't know what the debt involved there is, but we know that the cost of keeping the nursery running are £400,000. We also know that later on in the reports, there's £200,000 going to school and £2 million to the capital fund for schools. We know that there's going to have to be spend in changing the bulky waste system, the PPOs, the waste plant, and costs like election costs for officers to run things. So it seems like what all this report does is highlight the expenditure from a money tree without offering any solutions. And when you add those up, it's more than the £1 million that's suggested in there, and it's more than the £6 million that this report highlights. We've heard, sorry, I know it's political, Tony, but we've heard about the intention and the benefits of carrying through manifesto pledges, but there's a cost to all of those manifesto pledges not either being changed or doing it a different way. And what we heard from the leader of the council was that he was going to find ways of saving money, but he's not telling us what they are at this stage.
Thank you, Chair. Well, we need to strengthen the plans for mitigation, and we'll bring that back at 2:45.
Oh, yes, Councillor Morton.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. I think I've got a couple of observations, and the first one is numbers don't lie. We are in a very, very difficult position financially as a council, and I think what you alluded to is that what this report doesn't take into account is all the additional spending commitments that the current administration has alluded to, and the harsh reality of, well, if they want to do all this, they've got to find a way of funding it, which means either taxing people more or moving money from one budget to another. A couple of the other additional spending commitments that the administration's pledged to do, create a city centre task force to save the high street. That'll be additional spend. Delivering a climate change recycling hub, again, additional spend. And of course, they want to review the previous administration's last budget. So when you start totaling all this up, and what you mentioned as well, Chairman, very quickly that £6 million figure is going to be dwarfed. You know, the moonshine economics that's being banded around by the leader and deputy leader of the administration and the sheer, what feels like sheer economic and financial incompetence is really quite scary. And they have got to get a grip on the financial situation of this council. Otherwise, by the end of the year, we're going to be in some serious, serious trouble.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Drawing attention to other minutiae. 4.28. Yeah. Sorry? I think so. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Drawing attention to other minutiae in the report. 4.28, where it talks about staffing. Well, clearly, staffing is the essential resource that we need to deliver services to our people in Derby. And I just wanted to juxtaposition that with the actual graph that there is on agency staff. So it talks about staffing pressure, and it highlights in particular due to staff at the top of the scale that have been underfunded and underfunded posts. Now, I wouldn't like to think that we are an administration that is perhaps considering getting rid of our experienced staff because they're expensive and replacing them with less experienced staff. So I just really want to know what is the thinking there. And then we have the situation of, at the same time, the spend on agency staff declining over a period of time. So I just want some thoughts here in terms of experienced staff, their position in this organisation. Thank you.
The staff at the top of the scale, we don't fully fund all the staffing. We do it, and we set a budget for midway through. So some people are at the bottom, some people are at the top, and we set a budget for midway. If a lot of people are at the top of the scale, then it will form a pressure. It's not about moving people on at the top of the scale. It's just a pressure because a lot of people in that service are at the top of the scale where we've not budgeted at that position. Thank you. Sorry, was there another question?
It was about the decline in agency staff over a period of time.
I'll get you some more information on that and email it over. That's okay.
Okay, well, if you get that information, but I'm not sure that a reduction in expensive agency staff is such a bad idea, but we'll take that for what it is.
It's positive, but not when you're not replacing staff. We have seen and read elsewhere where we have one of the council with the highest sickness rate, stress rate. Could it be partly to do with the fact that we're understaffed?
I think there are a lot of issues, Councillor Wright, and not least in the likes of adult services, where it's almost impossible to recruit the staff without going to agency and other forms of the business that we do. So whilst in the ideal world, I don't think we would use agency staff, but sometimes we have to do that. Listen, this is a detailed report. It's not a good report. In terms of recommendations, I haven't heard any coming forward, but as a scrutiny board, I think we need to note the report, but also express concern about the financial travel direction in terms of a lack of proposed savings. Yeah?
I'll second that, Chair.
Okay, we'll do that. Okay with that? Yeah. Moving on then to financial procedure matters.
Thank you, Chair. That's me again. So this report deals with 4 items. The first one is to approve a procurement exercise to establish a provider who can arrange the sale of external business advertising on the Council's refuse collection vehicles. The Street Pride team are looking to work with a supplier who can oversee the sale and creation of external business advertising on the side of a proportion of the Council's refuse collection vehicles. It's felt that an external provider with experience of managing advertising space on such a unique asset could support the Council to develop this income opportunity. There are no costs to the Council for entering into this contract, and to ensure no advertisers who may have negative implications for the Council or its stakeholders are used, all prospective advertisers will have to comply with the Council's advertising and sponsorship policy.
So on that one, Tony, I think we probably would endorse that as a route of making some savings or increasing income. You've got 24 more of those in your pocket, and you can bring those out, that's fine. Just a word of caution on that, of course, is the loss of the ability for the council to post its own information, the call for foster children on the side of the lorries and to get messages out for herself, but that should be outweighed by the income. Are we agreed on that?
There is still the ability for the Council to advertise on a proportion of the refuse vehicle. Item 2 is to approve a tender for the East Midlands and Mid-Anglia Libraries Consortium, EMMA, for library stock and materials. Derby Libraries is proposing to go out to tender for library stock with 11 authorities as part of a consortium. This will allow Derby to benefit from larger discounts from being part of this larger group. If the Council were to tender alone, the discounts would be hugely reduced or potentially not given at all, with the possibility of not even being considered by book suppliers, as there are a limited number of providers.
How much are we authorising spend there, if you like? How much do we spend on library stock materials?
The value of the contract is £960,000, but that's for all of them. I'll get the detail of the
Is that between the 10 or 12 authorities that's involved
11.
in it? Yeah.
I'll get you the detail of the annual budget for Derby Libraries.
I wouldn't be able to tell you exactly, Chair. It'd be better if we find out for you.
So item 3 is to delegate approval to submit plans and, if successful, bid for and accept the levy funding, which is local electric vehicle infrastructure funding provided by central government. The Council has been provisionally allocated up to 1.758 million capital and 291,000 revenue funding from the government's levy fund. The business case for this funding is to be submitted by November 23, and delegated approval is requested to finalise plans, bid for and accept this funding, subject to the appropriate terms and conditions. Levy funding will enable the installation of charge points on streets or in public car parks so that residents without off-street parking will have the access to charge points closer to home.
Anybody not want to take advantage of a government investment opportunity? Councillor Kerr.
Chair, this is something which people have raised with me, and I don't even have many, compared to some wards, I don't have that many places where there isn't any off-street parking for people. So this is something that's going to be really important for the city, and I think we need to look at how we can be creative in maximising the way this quite small grant will be able to go and how we can make use of it. And I think there's two elements of this. One, I think we need to do a consultation so that people know that it's happening, so that they can buy into it and see how important it is for people in different parts of the city. For example, there are people who are getting electric taxis who want to be able to charge them, and they're concerned about where they're going to be able to charge their low emissions taxis. And we also know that there are people who areas where there are fewer people who can afford a car, and electric cars are particularly unaffordable because of their high capital cost. So there may need to be fewer in those areas. And those two things may be contradictory. So, but as well as the consultation, I think we need to look and see if there are private sector partners who will work with us on this. And it may be to be able to help with the installation costs, or it may be to provide land on which can become car parking charge areas, which would otherwise be vacant land or underutilised land. Or potentially car parks for business that can be utilised in the evenings for people who live nearby. So I think we need to be creative about the way we use this so that we can maximise its value. Thank you.
I don't disagree at all. I think Nigel Bryan and his team are looking at the many and varied options for increasing the availability of electric charging points. So, yeah, absolutely agree. So your last point, Tony.
Thank you, Chair. Item 4 is asked for approval to increase the St Benedict Catholic Voluntary Academy Expansion Scheme, a mouthful, from 6.165 million to 6.365 million, an increase of £200,000. This is a variation of the grant agreement. The variation is because of further detailed design, planning, contractor engagement and an increase in construction market costs, which have led to an update of the forecast costs. Thank you, Chair.
Tony, with the DSG being predicted at 12 million, is this adding to that, along with the capital funding suggestion?
No, Chair, this isn't part of that. I can get some more detail on that, but this won't add to the DSG. It's a capital scheme. We've got the capital funding to do it.
Okay. Any other questions? I think that Councillor Holmes.
Thank you, Chair. Just going back, I do apologise to the levy. There's no potential revenue implications listed here at all. Doesn't seem to have been considered. I was wondering whether that's something that transport officers are going to be reporting to us on, because I know that they have huge concerns over any kind of spending at all, capital-wise, that would potentially create revenue spending costs. Sorry.
So the 291 capability funding is going to be revenue funding. So we're getting a capital allocation, but also a 291 revenue allocation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just to again jump back to the levy at 4.3, fully support it. I think it's brilliant simply if we can get that amount of funding through. Now, it's obviously a lot of capital and not as much revenue, which tells me a lot of buying power there that we would have. Once it's sort of known how much we'll get and there's sort of an idea of what we'll do with it, will it go before any boards to have a look at sort of either what it's going to be spent on or what it has been spent on?
So once we've got the final allocation, it'll need to come back to Cabinet to be added to the capital programme. At that point, you'll be able to see the plans. But before that, it will go through the appropriate boards.
Yep, brilliant. And it's just to see so that we get a view at some point of this is the amount that we got and this is what the proposals to be used on. Sounds like we'll get that. So brilliant.
Thank you.
Okay, unless there's any more questions for Tony, I believe that concludes the business of the evening, and we can close the meeting.